We are live right now.
All right, I'm ready.
And we are live right now on Instagram as well. So, Clive Morrison, we are live here at Campfire, the podcast where we have interesting conversations with everybody about interesting things. And I just want to let people know, Clive, I met you through a business connection where you're developing your business ideas, I'm developing my business ideas, and we've learned a lot about each other on a personal and professional level. And I think your story is really interesting. So if you want, why don't you just tell some people about who you are and what you do?
Oh, who I am and what I do. I always get um, who I am is Clive Morrison. That's there's many iterations of that, and I always say that who I am is because it's always evolving. It's always a different person who I was 5 years ago. But the essence of me of Clive Morrison is the name that I've been blessed with. I always say that I'm very proud of my name because it's my daddy's name, and so. But the iterations of who I am today would be just I always try to live by four principles, which is love, service, righteousness, and discipline. Um, they're the aspirational values that I would love, the principles that I strive to live by. And I'm a businessman. I always say my craft is business. I love business. I love the study of business. There's that marketing, sales, operations, human resources. But my one thing about businesses that I tell people is that business is to make an impact. That's my personal thing, right? Where it's not just to make a dollar. We need profit, but the ultimate thing is to make an impact.
Beautiful. I love it. I love that you even describe yourself as someone who this iteration of who you are has these four pillars. The idea of having these essential pillars of who we are is a way to kind of keep us on track. And so,
Mhm.
just even by the way that you introduced yourself, it suggests that you described yourself as having several iterations. Can you share for the audience one of the iterations about who you were and where you came from so that we can understand maybe that spectrum about who you were, where you are now, and then let's talk about the journey of who you were, where you came from, what you experienced, and how you came to be where you are now, because that in itself is a fascinating story that I personally think many people will hear and derive tremendous benefit from, especially knowing that in this world we are bound and destined to confront challenges in our world and what it means to overcome those challenges and to have the capacity to reinvent ourselves and redefine
Yeah,
ourselves.
yeah, definitely. And I was just because you're live on Instagram, so I wasn't even thinking about the live part, right? So I'm learning from you, right? This hey being live and everything like that. So I was letting people know that to get there. But the iteration is that I grew up in a small town in New York, Westchester County. Still home, Ossining Indians, but they changed the name to the Pride, I believe. So just a quick, so we'll get into, I guess, as questions get asked. I was raised with my mother and father. My father passed when I was 13. That changed the trajectory of my life. So I always say that how fathers are very important in lives of their children, and because not just for myself, my sisters, from my family, brothers and sisters, how it changed our lives. When I was 18, I went to prison for 20 years, from 18 to 38. I've been out 6 years now. I came home, me and my mother. I've been blessed to be able to build a business with her for the last since the day I came home, and then I've been growing from the skills I learned there was to grow a company that helps businesses grow and scale, and that is my main thing. And then I have a side, well, not side project, which is I hope to ultimately be my main thing, which is the importance of Black men being leaders in their community through business, where, like I said, business is about impact, where it's like, hey, how can we make sure in our community that we understand the skills of business and understand that business is a craft itself. So that is kind of the iterations, and and we can start wherever you want to, where we can dive in.
There's so many different angles upon which to unpack or unravel this story. But I just want to back up. I mean, you talked about business being like as a tool, as an opportunity to teach people how to empower themselves and to make positive changes in their world through the influence of business, or even through the profiteering from business and then that money as a tool to improve the quality of one's life. But why don't we go back to talk about how not having those opportunities, not having the understanding of these tools, not having maybe the guidance on a social level. Um, can we talk about some of the things that might have led you down a pathway that found you in imprisoned for a couple of decades? I mean, of your most formative years. I mean, 18 to 38, you said?
Yes, sir.
Those like
No days off.
but that just
Yeah, it wasn't.
what that simply means to me is also that you were a child,
Yeah,
essentially,
just.
when you
Mhm.
entered the prison system. Yeah, well, can you talk a little bit about maybe some of the circumstances that led you to having those 20 years taken away from you, and maybe that then we can, as the conversation goes, we can tie that into how you're now combating and fighting that by raising awareness about how people can improve their lives by maybe giving them some power over the choices that they make in the direction of their lives.
Yeah, definitely. So what I always say that most people in my neighborhood, most people who end up in prison end up because they have a criminal lifestyle, right? It's like a business. It's like if you're in business, we connected through a business opportunity, through a group, right? A business group. So when you meet like-minded people, other opportunities come about, right? But you're living a business lifestyle, right? Which means like, hey, I may be in business doing this, I may be in business doing that, but this is the opportunity that caught me, right? You didn't start out wanting to do a podcast, right? You used, or you didn't start out just saying, "Hey, I'm gonna do Instagram Live." You said, "What other business opportunities can I have?" Well, same thing with criminal lifestyle. Criminal lifestyle is that there's a lot of criminal thinking ways that we have, and that's what happened to me. Is that, and I always tell people that you have to understand that I did a lot of things. I could have went to prison for a number of things. I went to a prison for armed robbery, but I've assaulted people. Sold drugs. I had a criminal lifestyle, right? I jaywalked. You know what I'm saying? Like literally, just there was a lot of things that we were doing criminally that is a lifestyle. When somebody's a partier, right? They know all the greatest parties. They live the party lifestyle, which could be fashion. And I just think that these are all different lifestyles. When somebody's a mom, right? They do all the mom things. And it's just a mentality that you have of, so you find yourself in that circle, dealing with moms, acting like a mom, displaying like a mom. And I just started with that. And that comes from, we live in this country, and a lot of times people really would say, hey, we all have the same opportunity. But a lot of times we don't even know we have that opportunity, or that opportunity doesn't seem real to us, right? And that's what happened to me. I was always told, you're a smart kid. You're very smart. But I was also under the impression that this was not for me, that I couldn't succeed like that, that I wasn't good enough. And there's a lot of things that happens where we're all walking around with these ideas in our head, right? As business people, we watch motivational videos, we talk to each other, we have to encourage each other. Hey, you're good enough. It's a fine balance, right? Because there is you can do it, but there is I don't have the skills, right? And you have to be very objective with yourself. You can't just beat yourself down like, oh yeah, you're terrible, but you can't also over glorify and say things you can't do. So how do you walk that line? And being young, I just beat myself down and saying that, hey, I grew up with criminals. We are criminals. This is what I do, and also where in this society, a lot of times profit is the motivation. Because people always say, hey, we need to get the bag. We need to get a profit. And I say, there's nothing wrong with the profit. It's just that the profit can't be the motivation. That has to be a tool. The money can't, nobody, and if anybody does, that's cool. But I ask everybody all the time, would you live in the desert with $1 billion? Right? If I gave you $1 billion, would you go live in the Sahara Desert? You can't talk to anybody. You can't deal with, you can have water if you want to, but you can't do nothing with $1 billion. So it's not the money that we want, it's the impact. And I didn't understand that, so I would do anything for the money, not understanding my reputation, not understanding who I wanted to be as a man, not defining our character. And this goes back to business, why I love business so much, because under the guise of business, you have to define your core values. You have to define your principles. You have to define your mission. You have to define, right? But these are things that each person should be doing in their own life. They should be defining who they are, what their mission is. And when you don't have that, you go with the wind, right? We see businesses who are just after a profit and they go down because they say yes to everything because they haven't defined who they are. And we as a people don't define who we are. We don't define what our mission is, what we're out here to do, what we want to accomplish, what really means true bringing life to us. Because if you're only in business for a profit, then you're going to attract sharks, and you're going to become dissuaded yourself because you're going to get money, and then you're going to see that money's not everything.
That was that was a lot, and that was powerful. But the most powerful part for me is this idea of, if we don't, as men, take the chance to define ourselves and who we are, if we don't take the opportunity to understand the world that we live in and define our value system, that we may get caught in the trap of having other people, external circumstances, society, the neighborhood we grew up in, the influences around us, those might be the very things that define us. And those might be the very things that determine our value system. And if it turns out that the influences that define us or define our value system are corrupt or nefarious or greedy or violent, or or inherently don't understand the risks, then we can get caught up in running the risk of being defined as something that has real world consequences. And in this case, the lack of defining who you are, or the lack of the guidance in establishing those value systems, put you in a situation where some of those values will compromise, or you not defining yourself put you in a position where you are then defined by society as a perp, as a criminal, and then eventually as a convict. And when did that transition happen? Because I know it didn't happen like from the time that whatever the incident was, and however far into that, like description you want to go, that's an invitation that's up to you. If you want to talk about the circumstances that led you to commit the crime, or get involved with people that committed that crime, and to the point where you were, grand jury, convicted, sentenced, and all that. But there's a whole spectrum there. And I'm sure at a certain point it clicked for you. Maybe not immediately when you were 18 years old and sentenced, but at some point it clicked for you that it was up to you to take that power back and no longer allow society or external variables to define who you are and what your value system was, but you were able to take back that power. Can you talk a little bit about the process of when and how in your experience you were able to redefine who you were, reinvent yourself, and then reestablish these core principles and values that were able to change this iteration of Clive Morrison for us?
All right, so I can go back first where, as I said before, that's a number one thing is not defining your principles, right? My dad, who was a great man and who to this day his influence has impacted and it's taught me a lot of intensity, not extensity, right? And the intensity is that I like to be around people and say, hey, let's have a small group and let's pour into each other, right? It's because it's easier, we live in Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and people want to they want to talk to millions, but the greatest relationships, right, with Jesus, Prophet Muhammad, the Buddha, right, we're with 12 men, we're with 10 men, we're with 5 men, we're with pouring into them, right? So that was one of the things that I learned from my father was that he went to communities, Jamaica to Canada to America, and he made an impact on a lot of people in that just being committed to a community. At that time, I didn't understand those. I didn't understand those things, right? I wasn't assessing his life. I didn't understand. I didn't look back and say, what made people want to come to this man and talk to him, have conversations with my father in his room, and I understand the impact that he made on me. And
what when he passed away, right? I was 13, and it was a hard time for my mother, hard time for my family. Everybody kind of went their own separate ways. There was a lot of separation at that time. And because of the separation, I was left in and I went to the streets, right? Wanted to find the family. I played basketball. Everybody was like, oh, this kid is smart. He's going to go to college. He's going to do all these things. But I wanted to be like the other, like I had older brothers, cousins who were known in the streets, and I wanted to have that respect, right? I didn't want to be looked down as Little Clive. That's what they called me. My father was Big Clive, and he used to call me Little Clive. And I didn't want to be looked at as Little Clive. I wanted to have the respect, and I thought the respect came from being in the streets, not being somebody. As I look back on it, I figured that that's what it was. Not being somebody who went to school and played basketball. I didn't think that got respect, right? That didn't, and I see it a lot of times. A lot of people don't think that right now education and knowledge and intelligence gets the respect that we think about. And because of that, I went down this path. And once again, like I said, when you're chasing something, when you're not chasing your values, when you're chasing validation, when you're chasing all these things that you haven't been taught not to chase, then you're going to have a problem. You're going to have it where you're like, oh, I'm just going to chase it. It doesn't matter what I have to do to go get money. It doesn't matter what I have to do to get respect. It doesn't matter what I have to do to get validation. Whatever it is that you're chasing, then you'll go down this deep rabbit hole and say, no, I have principles. If I would love that, but I'm not going to violate my principles by it. And I always tell people, I'll give money any kind of way as long as it doesn't violate my principles and morals and my values. So, and once again, I don't have any. There's no question that I won't answer because I understand that this story is something that people want to hear and people think about. I always think about it. It's very boring, but people say like, oh, you got a story. Where we got to the point, your question of where how did this all change? Where did this come from? When we were in prison, and I want to preface this. My first 10 years in prison, I was wild, right? Like I was fighting, doing all kind of things. I was very wild. My second 10, my last 10, the first five of the last 10 was when I really started reading. Two books changed my life. I read literally thousands of books, right? But two books that always stand out to me is Asafo by Marley Marudi. It's about manhood, being a man, being a warrior, right? And then there's Mind is the Master, which is by James Allen. A lot of people know his book, uh, As a Man Thinketh, but he has a 1,000-page book that's called Mind is the Master, which goes through the depths of mastery of oneself and also being spiritually in tune with the Most High, right? What those steps are, what we're doing. And one of the things that I always had to think about was when I made a situation, when a situation happened, I always start with where could I have done better at, right? Where could I have done better? And it's hard because sometimes you're like, nah, that person was totally wrong. And it's easy to just reflect and be like, they're totally wrong. And I still tell people, even if you blame some, even if they're to blame, you're still responsible, right? And that's very difficult, right? That's a very difficult mantra to have because you're like, well, he just came and attacked me from nowhere. It's like, well, could I have done something not to been there? And you may be right. And I tell people, I say, you may be right. There may be nothing you could have done. But when I start from that, then I can say I can really feel at ease with myself and say, you know what? I really did everything I could within what I knew at this time to the direction I'm going. I always tell people, I'm doing the best I can with the knowledge I have at this moment. That's what I'm doing. So I may be totally wrong 5 years from now. I'm doing the best I can with this knowledge. And to finish off the point was we went into my last 5 years, I started instilling the principles that I was learning, right? Because habit is so hard to change. That is the number one thing that it's easy to read the book. It's easy to post it on Instagram. It's hard to live it, right? People have their quotes like, "Oh man," and I used to fall for this when I first got out. I see these quotes because I wasn't on Instagram or anything like that, right? I didn't really know the social media like how it was, and people would post these things, and I meet them in real life, and they didn't live anything like that, right? And I was like, man, that's wild. So and I'm saying because I know now that it's very hard for the discipline part, but I was in an environment where I didn't have the temptations that you have out here in the streets, where you didn't have access to a lot of things. So it was a kind of easier place to get rid of those not just physical but mental temptations, right? And that could be anything: lying, cheating, stealing, or, just procrastination, all of these things, taking action, fears, all those things are habits that we have that we never question them. So that was one of the things that I always think about questioning. Men of Principles, the last 5 years, we formed a group called Men of Principles. And the Men of Principles, what we did for that was we said, we used to always have somebody would do something in prison. I have to just tell us what would happen. We would be in prison. Somebody would say, why'd you do that? Right? They would ask me or whoever, right? We would do something crazy and be like, well, what do you expect? I'm in prison. You know what I'm saying? Of course I'm gonna act like an animal, right? And then when I started reading, I was like, oh man, I really do have control. I really do have a say in how I'm going to conduct myself.
Mm.
And so we started saying Men of Principles that, hey, we're not going to be dictated by our environments. We're not going to say we acted this way because of the environment. And environment is very real, right? And it's a very hard threshold to come over. Environment is very real. But when you I give the analogy of the baby, where the baby needs the mother, but then after a while it doesn't matter what the environment is, the baby can have its own food, right? It doesn't need to say, oh, I need my food from my mother, because that environment. The same way we have it in our environment there, where we're in prison, we're gonna do whatever. We started Men of Principle. Get up every morning at 5 a.m. Read, stretch, right? Study. This was every day. Then we said no days off, right? We said 7 days a week. We were like, hey, because somebody said we were doing it 5 days a week, and then somebody said, man, it's a good thing we have the weekend. That's the days off, right? And I said, and I forget how the discussion happened, but we were like, man, there's no day off in life, right? You have to live every day. So we said, why are we taking a day off from things that are improving our life? What are we taking a day off? We don't enjoy this. We don't love this. And it happened. So that's how I got to the point to where I started living by those things, was that we had to practice it every day. And I realized that those principles that no matter what environment what I in, I would conduct myself. I had the choice of how I was going to conduct myself.
That is a beautiful way to explain that powerful concept of understanding the influences of our environment, but also understanding the power of our choices. It brings into question this idea of free will sometimes as well, where sometimes we recognize that the things that happen to us in our lives can affect the way that we respond to them, but they shouldn't necessarily be excuses as to why we behave that way. Some people talk about, free will being a challenge insofar as, like, you can only exercise free will when you have a certain level of choice, and you can only have that certain level of choice when you understand the choices that are available to you. And it almost seems like growing up, there weren't that many options for you. There wasn't that much guidance for you to kind of say, okay, look, you can make a choice, but here would be the repercussions. You can make that decision, but here would be the consequences. And it's not until afterward, that you're already incarcerated for over a decade and still making poor choices to engage in conflict and violence, that you finally were able to understand the power that you had. And it almost sounds like, in your ability to take responsibility and radical accountability for your behavior and for your actions and for the decisions you've made, that is where things started to shift for you, when you took your power back, and instead of allowing the external circumstances to decide how you were, you as a man took it upon yourself to make choices about how you were going to live your life, how you were going to react to the situation. It's almost like, in some ways, the suffering that we go through in life forces us to look at the influences around us and understand that either we give our power away to the external variables and we become a victim of our circumstances, or we take our power back and we say, no, it's up to us to make different decisions. And in a lot of ways, the story you tell is not just about the first iteration of Clive Morrison into the young adult, into the man that was in prison, then now onto the founder of CMJ Business Solutions. But you are all of those things, and in a lot of ways, all of us are all of those things. There's a younger version of me. There's an adolescent version of me. There's a teenage 20 something year old, 30 something year old version of me. And they're, as you suggested, all different iterations. And so, if you could speak more directly to the younger version of you, what do you think that you would try to, what kind of knowledge, wisdom, or guidance would you impart on the younger version of Clive to help him understand the power that maybe he wasn't aware that he did have at that point? What would you do to maybe try to describe to him or convince him or help him to understand himself, and that he had more power of choice than he had? Because maybe somebody that would even watch this might feel like similarly to you did when you were younger, and might hear something that you might offer to a younger version of yourself and really recognize that their personal power is greater than they might imagine right now.
Yeah, so I really believe that it's not just a word. Now, there are words, there are things, but it's a constant pouring in, right? A lot of times we read the story of Jesus and we don't really realize that Jesus had Jesus was with the disciples for 3 years, right? The story goes so quick we don't really think about it, but he was really pouring into them for 3 years. And a lot of times it's not a one-off situation. This is why sports is so powerful, right? Because you're practicing with your teammates every day, you're with the coach, he's able to pour into you. There's so many little moments, right? So if I come and see a guy and I see him on Friday and I'm like, hey, why are you not in school? He's like, oh man, school's crazy, da da da, right? That's not the only time he's gonna have trouble, because that mindset doesn't change in one day, right? Have there been people that talk to me? Of course. I didn't. It's not like I didn't live in a place where nobody ever gave me a good word, but I didn't have somebody that could pour into me, that I could turn to, that I felt comfortable with. And I said, you know what? This person is here for the betterment of me. Nobody cares what you know until they know you care, and that's such a true statement, right? And that's where it is that I never had a person that I felt that I could go to
Mm,
that cared, that was a man. Because my mother loved me, but I always tell people, you want to protect your mother. You don't want to be like your mother. You see what I'm saying? So because we don't want to be like our mother, it's hard to go to her and be like, hey, what's the advice? What should I do? What should I be on? Even though she wants to be better for you, but you want to be there to protect her and help her. You don't want to be the burden on her. So I didn't really have that person. And if I said to my younger self, what would be the thing? It's not a one word sentence, or it's not a one person acknowledgement. It's a mindset shift, right? To take responsibility, to take action, to take care of yourself, to make sure that you have principles, to examine yourself, to take time alone, right? To engage in the community, right? To find the right people, to have a tribe, right, of like-minded individuals.
mm.
There's so many things to do, but it has to be that we're constantly pouring in, because I can't give you that message one time. That has to be a message that's constantly going out and going over, and we're communicating that multiple times, in the good times and the bad times, right? So when it's like, hey, we celebrate a win, but understand there's still more to do. Hey, there's a loss right here, what we perceive as a loss, because I don't even think there's any wins or losses, just lessons. But what we perceive as a loss, and we say, hey, you know what? Even though that situation happened that we didn't like, what is the next steps? It's just a situation, it's just a path in life. Let's go on to the next thing. So there are many lessons that have to be learned over time, iterations, that it's about having deep relationships. And that's why I believe in intensity, not extensity.
Yeah, and I hear you clearly talking about what it means to come to like an impasse or a fork in the road or a place where you have to make a decision. And maybe that fork in the road is, like you said, something good happens or something bad happens. But instead of looking at it as something good or something bad, we might instead be able to see it as, okay, what is the opportunity here to exercise my judgment, make a decision, and make a choice to move forward and take the next best step? Meaning, if this is a problem, how can I see this problem instead as a challenge that can make me grow? Or if this is an opportunity, instead of taking advantage of it and just benefiting from it, how can I use this opportunity to make the best choice for the outcome? And I hear you also talking a lot about having these decisions being guided not just on an occasional right and wrong, but having people in your sphere of influence you even refer to as a tribe, meaning like on some level, maybe that's the neighborhood, maybe that's the community, maybe that's the town you live in, maybe that's the local, for me, it's like it was either hanging out by the park or then it became the bar. And then it became the opportunity to be in different circles. And it's like you're choosing the people that you're surrounding yourself with that are going to have an influence over you negatively or positively. And so you almost look at it and say, instead, what is the benefit or the problem? What is the lesson that I can learn that can help us to grow? And surrounding, how can we, how what can you speak to insofar as the way that children are influenced by society nowadays? And just like I asked you to like have a conversation with that younger self in a more general way, what do you think younger people need insofar as guidance from adults in the world? Not just their fathers, not just their older brothers, but even someone like yourself. Because I mean, I'm not going to speak for you or tell you what you are, because that's you. But I can tell you the way that I see you. I see you as someone that has this potential to share your life experiences to specifically help guide young men who might be on the precipice or the edge of making a bad decision that could have catastrophic impact on their life. I see you as having an opportunity to speak to that younger version of yourself and maybe help them to recognize their power. What is it we can do as adults to help influence the younger people to make better decisions moving forward and to live better lives?
And examination, right? So, and I say examination as in teaching them how to examine their actions. So, if you watch any great football player, right? You watch Tom Brady, you watch Warren Moon, you watch any great football player, right? That one of the main things that they do is they watch their plays, good or bad. There's an examination, like, oh, what could I have done better on that play? What could I have done? But that also way comes back from that examination. What are we examining it against? We're examining against our principles, our values, our morality, right? So that goes into deeper. Did I do the work to go and say, what are my
Mm.
principles? What are my morals? What are my values, right? And then saying, and then when the test comes up, am I willing to stand up no matter what the situation is about my morals and principles, values? One of the things that when you're young, especially you're like, oh, that's my homeboy, right? I'll in my neighborhood, we're like, yo, I'll die for you. You know what I'm saying? Like, you my man's, it's whatever, right? But in reality, now I'm like, oh no, that's not how it goes. I'm gonna die for the principles. If you've done something that violated all the way the principles, and this caused me harm, or problems in prison, because I started having homeboys who were cool with me, and they would do things that violate. They'd be like, well, that's your homeboy. You gotta ride with him. I'm like, no, he did something that's crazy. I'm not riding with that. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not doing that. Like, we can do whatever you want to do, but I'm not riding with that. You see what I'm saying? So, and then until we understand that you like, all right, I don't care what the consequences are because I believe in these principles, right? And that sometimes your principles will cause you harm. They
Yeah.
will, well, what you think, what you believe is harm, right? But that's what the whole thing has to go to the Most High, where you're like, I really believe in these principles, and because I believe in these principles, I believe that the Most High will protect me because I'm living by these principles, right? It,
Yeah.
it
And so
goes
that
even for
that
me, it
that
goes even deeper than that. But
yeah, so those principles, like again, when we're younger, we can derive those principles from the people that immediately surround us, and until we're introduced to higher principles, higher values, we can't really establish those principles until we understand them and know them. And sometimes it takes the guidance of older people, mentors, big brothers type of people to
that's why
really,
it takes discussions, though.
yeah.
And I'm saying that because it's easy to say, hey, put you in this environment, right? So if I put you in any environment, right, most likely you're going to adapt to if I take a young child, right, and I grow them in an environment, right? So you'd be like, oh, this environment, they had a good household, father and mother taught them well, the community was great, positive vibes, right? So most likely, but we've seen both sides, right? We've seen bad people come out of good communities, right? Then the other part is we've seen bad communities where people came out who did great things, right? So just understand that it can happen in any community. Where I'm saying is that now, of course, we know that the chances is different. It's like a flower growing in the concrete. Just because the flower grew there and it can grow there doesn't mean that's a good place to plant flowers. So examination, and what I'm saying is that we have to teach the kids to learn to make decisions, to examine things, right? Because even if I
Hmm.
say to you, this is the path, right? And I always give this dichotomy of, oh, you got to take action, right? Is it good to take action? But you also need to be patient. Is that true? How do we know when to be patient and when to take action? These are all judgments that we have to make, right? We should cut somebody off. We should keep giving them a chance. When is that right and when is that wrong? These are all things that need to be determined, because people just like, oh, you need to cut them off. Well, what's the line? Where do I need to cut them off at? What is the barrier? And that's where the examination comes from, and that's where the principles come from. And I'm saying that, it's not an easy answer, because you have to go do the work. We have to teach them to do the work. So these kids are out here, and you're saying, and I can say, I can give you my playbook, right? Now we do want to see things we emulate. We're like, all right, I'm gonna copy until I like, all right, I see this person, emulate them. They have the good life that I want. I respect them. I want to be like them. But even at that point, right? If you're a boxer, if you're, martial artist, if you play sports, you understand that copying can only get you so far. But then you have to start studying all the things that you copy from a person. You copied their style, and now you're like, okay, but I can take their style another level. Same thing with their morals and value, because you only took something. It's not truly yours, right? Because you've never examined it. You were just copying it. But when you start to really examine it, we have to teach the kids to examine your heart, think to yourself, be by yourself. But we're so in our phones, I see the kids and they're like this in their phone, right? They're locked in. Everything is external. More time with yourself.
Yeah.
And I would, and people always like, oh man, you did 20. I don't know how you did. I said, well, I feel blessed sometimes, because I was able to spend time by myself. I learned to live with myself. I had to question myself. I had to really be like, man, Clive, some of the things you be doing, because you got to understand it was a transition period. It wasn't like I just jumped from wilding to, discipline, right? There's a transition that goes on. It's like you thinking better, but you're not acting better. And then when you're thinking better, you're not acting better, you start that's a sting on your soul, on your heart, in your mind, that can beat you up in your ego, because you should be doing better, but your habits got you in a chokehold and you're not doing better.
Yeah, and it seems like it almost took you even a decade within the confines of the institution to start to recognize that you could make other choices. And you talk a lot about examination. I forget who said it, but one of these, great Stoic philosophers talk about, the unexamined life is not worth living. This idea that the awareness we have about ourselves, the awareness we have, or the examination, as you say, that we have about the decisions we're making and how those decisions are impacting and influencing us, have a great effect on the trajectory and the direction that our life goes. But at the same time, I also hear you holding up the mirror to yourself and having the bravery to take a good, long, hard look at yourself and say, instead of me looking on the outside and trying to point the fingers of blame at this or that, you accept responsibility for the choices you make, and only by recognizing the power that you have to make different choices is where the change can happen. Because in a lot of ways, I would imagine that some of the things you experienced as a young man, it's very likely you did not have other men, or at least other peers, other teens, other adolescents around you making decisions where you had a whole variety of different choices, where you could say, oh, I could choose to do A, B, C, D. Yeah, it would seem to me that you had limited choices, because a lot of the people around you in your sphere of influence, in your environment, were also probably making choices that weren't great. And you talked a little bit about nature versus nurture, like just because a flower can grow in the concrete doesn't mean it's the best environment for it. Like the environment you grew up in, what we look at society, and like someone might watch this conversation and be like, black men are incarcerated at higher rates because they commit higher rates of crime. And then you might have a perspective where you say, well, we don't have a lot of influences that are showing us the options that we might have to make different decisions. Whereas in other cultures, or in other parts of society, there are a lot more examples, guidance, and to that flower out of the concrete, the environment in which we're in has a huge bearing on whether that flower is going to flourish and whether there's going to be a healthy environment for that flower or other flowers to continue to grow around it and support that environment. So, what is it we can do to understand the environment? And I would like to also tie that into, what do you think it is about the environment in particular that young men are in? Men in particular feeling like some of their value and worth is based upon how tough they can be, or how much money they can make, or how much respect that they can have. How much of being a young man in an environment leads a young man who doesn't have good influences down a path where he may be a good, intelligent, good-hearted person, but even the best person or a good person in those environments might make a bad decision that would affect the rest of his life. What is it about the expectations or the environments that men are in, and how men are expected to survive? What does it say about our choices, and what do we need to give as far as guidance to young men to help them? You were saying about having an influence around you, or people around you to help you make good decisions. What do you think we can do to improve the situation so young men can see a better choice that can be made, so that they don't maybe make choices that maybe have a negative impact on their lives?
Yeah. So in that environment, first, I want to say that I believe there's a collective illusion that those things, toughness, right, machismo, um, not caring, right, that these things really garner you respect. One, they garner you fear, you know what I mean? So they don't garner you respect. People don't like you. They, you know, they they fear you, right? So it's like, oh, here goes such and such. You know, it's like the movie Devo, right? Nobody respected him. They just were scared of him, you know, in Friday, right? So nobody, it wasn't like people weren't like, oh yeah, Devo's, I respect you. Like, oh, here come Devo. Nobody wanted him around. They were just afraid of him, right? They did not respect him as a man. That was all it was. Even men who, it's not about, so we understand as men, it's not about, hey, can you go pick on people? It's, will you defend yourself? And defending yourself is not just a physical thing, it's a morality thing. Will you defend yourself against the thoughts and ideas of the people, right?
Mm.
So that, I just want to start with the collective illusion that we really believe these things are true, but they're not true. So when you watch TV and you watch a show and you see a tough guy, you think that's what we have to emulate, but that's not really. I don't look at what people say. I look at how people respond, right? And what people respond to is people who are men who are kind, men who are gentle, men who will defend themselves, men who are not picking on people, right? Men who are not abusive. We don't respond, right, to men who are that way. We don't, you know, somebody asked me one day, said, oh, you men need to deal with the men who are beating on their wives. And I said, but I have no friends like that. Right? I don't have a friend like that. I don't have a friend where me and him is, I don't know wife beaters. You see what I'm saying? Like if one of my friends is beating his wife, I don't know nothing about that because we're not friends, because you don't uphold the same morals and principles that I do. So a lot of times we think that these things are going on, right? And they're and the men who live a certain way are not around the men who don't live a certain way, right? Because more men than women, men of a feather flock together, right? Men who are on the same thing. They, you know, it's hard to have somebody in your circle that you know doesn't live by your principles, doesn't live by your values, that you would be dealing with every day, right? He's just, you would be like, oh no, I can't deal with this person. And what has to happen in these? So I just want to start with the collective illusion that we have, that young boys are growing up with, watching movies, watching games, watching things, thinking that's how we have to act, right? We have to be tough. Da, da, da. They don't understand the difference between toughness of the, I will fight, I will beat you up, and I can, you know, make you fear me, between the, hey, I'm a person that will defend myself mentally, physically, spiritually, right? It's not just about, hey, I'll fight you, but mentally also, hey, I have these principles spiritually, whatever I believe in, I'm ready to defend that. What we need to do, what has to happen in those situations is men who are successful have to go back to community where men are not successful, where young boys are not successful. You have to be dedicated. It's going to take a sacrifice. Once again, I just go back to the money thing. Are we here for money, or are we here for impact? Right? What are we here for? You know, so this world, there was a time when there was no money. And we were just to make sure that everybody else was good. You know, and now and the debate is always, hey, well, how would you live without money? And I just think there's two extremes. People are like, oh, we don't, what I'm saying, I don't believe in business. I'm, capitalism, da da da, right? And then there's other people who are like, yo, you got to get a profit. Profit is everything, right? You go on a stock market anywhere. Like, what's your profit? What's your revenue? What have we made this year, right? You know what I'm saying? How much profit did we make this year? What are we doing? Da da. How much cash do we have? Whatever. The middle ground is that, and I always give this analogy, is how much air do we need in life? I'm asking you a question. I'm just asking you, how much air, how long could you go without air?
2 minutes.
2 minutes, right? So how important is air?
Without it, we have nothing else.
I got you. Do you think about air every day?
Hardly ever.
Hardly ever, right? Okay. And the reason why I'm saying that is because even though it's the most essential thing you need, right? You don't think about it hardly at all, right?
Nope.
Well, it's the same thing because you use your air. We're talking right now, right? What do you use air for?
Everything so I would not be alive without it.
I got
and
you,
yet
right?
I hardly think about it. You're right.
Hardly anything without it. So in this society, what happens if you don't have any money?
Yeah.
What would happen if you didn't have no money at all?
I wouldn't survive. I'd have everything taken away from me.
Right? So it's just like air. It's very important, right? But would you want to live in the desert with just air? You knew you could breathe, but you couldn't have nothing else. Would you know you're alive? Would you want to just have nothing but air?
No, I would want to have all the other things that would make life enjoyable.
Same thing with money, right? You wouldn't want to live in a desert with nothing but money, right? And being broke is like a person who needs the air, those air filters when they have to breathe with the mask. So it's like, hey, let's go play basketball. Oh, I can't play basketball. I don't have enough air. Let's travel across town. Oh man, my air pump, man. You know what I'm saying? So a person with money doesn't think about money anymore. When you have money, that's not money only solves money problems. Air only solves air problems, right? You want to take it, you use air to have more wind, to be able to have more energy, to be able to speak longer, to be able to go on a podcast, right? But what happens if you had that little air machine and you could only say, yo, Clive, we can only do 20 minutes, bro. That's it. I want 20 minutes. I don't have no more air.
Yeah. Or even on a different level, you were asking me like about air insofar as like how much I needed to survive, which I need it or I'd be dead in 2 minutes. But how often do I think about it? Hardly ever, because I have enough all the time. So I just take it for granted in the same way that people take their financial stability for granted. Whereas someone that grows up in an environment where maybe they have a plastic bag around their head and they're having trouble breathing, they're not going to be focusing so much on all the external things, like you said, playing basketball, riding their bike, or just being
they're not focused on nothing
they're not focused on
breathing.
Anything except getting the thing that is suffocating them and stopping them from surviving on a basic level out of the way, so that they can feel like they can live and breathe. And when you make that, it's something that, so like the vast majority of people every day, all day, go around without thinking about air. But if you put a bag over someone's head, that would be the one and only thing. Or if you threw someone in the water and they didn't know how to swim, the only thing they were thinking about is, I got to get me some breath. I got to get some air. That's all they'd be focused on. And for someone that's in this safety of the boat or breathing fresh air, they don't know what it's like to feel suffocated. They don't know what it's like to feel like their very essential survival skills are focused on nothing else but just trying to breathe and do something that most people take for granted, or a lot of people take for granted. There's a lot of poor people in the world, but the way that you break down that example of helping to understand how some people, they're fighting for their own survival. Well, I may look at it and be like, oh, that guy did something shitty, man. He picked up a loaded gun and stuck it in some dude's face, and that guy was innocent. But really, there was no intent on some level to say, oh, I'm going to choose that guy because I hate that guy and I want to take his life or threaten him or make him crap his pants. I'm doing what I need to do to get this bag off my head. Or I'm in the same way that maybe somebody around them if someone was going to rescue them because they were drowning, might jump onto that person and hold them down just to try to get some air and breathe. They're not doing it to try to kill the other person, but they're doing it just to try to survive. And when you kind of break it down like that, it may actually help some people to understand the desperation that a lot of people, especially a lot of young men in situations, might find themselves in. And there's another thing I want to remark on, like you said, that especially as men, this idea that strength is less about violence or power. Like, you could be a very strong, intelligent man that has the capacity for violence and to physically take care of another person and harm that person if you chose to. But in a lot of ways, strength, machismo, toughness, respect comes more from a place of knowing that you can commit violence, but choosing instead to use that strength to be more vulnerable, or to recognize in the young person the fear of maybe not having enough air to breathe, or seeing how that young person just desperately wants to feel like they matter. They want to feel cared for. That young boy wants to be seen. He wants to feel like he's important. He wants to feel like he matters to somebody, or that his life has some value. And when we grow up in a world where we oftentimes may not feel like we matter, or we're not seen, or we're not heard, it does take the strength of a man not to just go out and use that dominance to gain for himself, but to also share those experiences with other young men who might be suffering and struggling and trying to swim, and saying, hey, bro, you don't need to push somebody else down to learn to save yourself and get that air. Let me teach you how to swim. Let me teach you how to breathe. Let me teach you how to get yourself out of that position where you don't feel desperate. And a lot of the times, young men just do not have the influences around. Can you talk a little bit about maybe moving forward, how we can maybe create environments, or, and again, I'm speaking for myself here, Clive. I'm not telling you what you are. I'm telling you how I see you. I just see you as someone that has the tremendous potential and power based upon your experiences, as someone that maybe didn't have the guidance and the influence or the environment, or somebody modeling and exemplifying the behavior that you needed to guide you in the right direction. If you are the flower that's grown through the concrete, instead of trying to force other young men to push through the concrete, which is really difficult, how can we change the environment to make it easier for other living, beautiful things to flourish in an environment that right now maybe isn't the best? How can we help young men specifically who may feel like they're suffocating, that they have something covering a bag over their head, or that they're in water and they don't know how to swim, and they're afraid that they're going to drown, and so they're making choices that are not good for them, that have real world consequences, that can get them incarcerated for 20 years? What can we do to maybe make changes as individuals, or on a larger level as society?
Yeah, so first we got to understand. So I want to address two things. The first is that you use the drowning, the bag, right? And so just saying somebody's drowning, that's a mindset, right? You're not actually like, so if I go in the water and it's 2 feet and I go underwater, right? You'd be like, I'm drowning. But somebody from the outside, like, yo, fam, just stand up, right? They're like, yo, just stand. But so being poor, this mindset, right? Because we live in America, especially living here in America, most times we have the opportunity to at least pay our bills, right? There's something we can go do, right? But a lot of times you don't see the other opportunities. And there's people around you like, you don't see all these opportunities? All you have to do is stand up. And you're like, nah, I can't stand up. That's a mindset thing, right? I just want to understand. I just want people to understand the mindset. So when you said the guy goes rob somebody, they go, because that's what I did, right? I went and robbed somebody, right? And I thought I didn't have no other options, right? I was like, oh, this is the only option I have. And and then I look back, I'm like, man, I had no reason to do that. I didn't have to do that. I was in 2 feet of water. I had a place to live, right? I could have went and be like, yo, mom, this was going on. I didn't have to go anywhere. There was no pressure. I had jobs. There was a lot of things that were going good that I didn't have to do anything, but you think you're drowning. You start putting pressure on yourself. You're like, and you don't understand what's going on. and people are telling you, just stand up, stand up. You're like, nah, 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 nah. You don't know what's going on. And you're trying to tell them something else. So it's just a mindset thing that we are a lot of times we're in this. So how do we change that mindset, right? That we're
Yeah.
not drowning.
Yeah. How do
Now,
you change that mindset? Exactly.
that's the first part. The next thing is what you said about the environment. Being that flower, how do we do it? So what we have to understand is that just like there's concrete around the flower, these environments were created. So what we have to do as men, we have to come pull up the concrete. We have to dig it out. We have to get the hole. We have to change the environment, right? We have to come back to where we're from and say, "Oh, I'm going to change this entire environment. I'm gonna lift up this concrete. I'm gonna dig it out. I'm gonna make it." They be like, "Man, 5 years later, you're like, man, there used to be concrete over there. We couldn't grow nothing." This man came over here, he digged up the concrete, hold it out, made sure we had good soil. You know what I'm saying? He had to do a lot of work, but now we can grow flowers right here, and the flowers is growing. They're like, man, they never even knew there was concrete there, right? But the same way that before the concrete was there were flowers growing there. And when those flowers didn't know nothing about concrete, and somebody came and put in concrete, and then the flower that grew there said, they're telling the new flowers, like, there used to be just flowers growing here. They're like, nah, this place is terrible. It's like, nah, it used to be good one time. There was no concrete. We had good soil and everything. So us as men, we have to go back to these communities and be able to say, yo, how can I pull up the concrete? How can I make it better? And that goes to working with other men, which is the hard part that people don't want to do. The
Clive.
hard part
Yeah, that is beautiful. No, continue. The hard part is.
The hard part is that people don't want to go back. One is make relationships, right? Which is very difficult, right? To pour into somebody, to take their flaws, to watch them on this development, right? Because, like I said, it's very simple to say cut off and pour in, right? But are you the person I need to pour into? If you come to a job, there's going to be certain people that they don't have all the skills, but I can see the potential to pour into them. There's going to be other people like, oh, nah, I need to cut them off. But what does that look like? Especially when we go back to those environments, we have to pick the people and we have to choose. The disciples from Jesus were men that he chose. He was around a lot of men. And there's a lot of men that could have been his disciples, but he chose these 12 that he said, I'm going to pour into. Right. So it wasn't just a thing where it's like, yo, I'm going to pour into anybody. I got to pour into these men. These are the men that I chose that I felt like could do the thing and take this on to another level and hear my message. I'm going to pour into them. And also still giving out his message on speeches, going around talking to people. But his most biggest work was pouring into those 12 men. And that's what we have to do as men, going back to our community, pouring into the men.
I love it. I love the idea. I just want to thank you for not only helping to change your own mindset, but then sharing the wisdom of changing that mindset with other people, and then spreading the awareness and the message about changing the environment. And I truly believe that the impact that you will have, that you're already having, by just being who you are and understanding these core principles of changing your mindset and changing your environment and spreading the awareness around how we can, as a community, come together and change our mindsets to help young people who feel like they're drowning or feel like they're suffocating, to help them breathe a little bit more deeper and feel supported, and give them options, teaching them about the choices and values and establishing the pillars of their own health and well-being by changing their mindset and by changing their environment and continuing to change the environment around them, not just for their own environment, but to help the environment for the other people around them that want to flourish, who also want to blossom and bloom. I really feel like it's an important message, and I just want to thank you for making the choice to do the work, to look in the mirror, and to make different choices, and to grow as a human being, and then to share that story with the world. It's beautiful to watch, and I just want to thank you for that, man.
I appreciate it, man. And I said, I'm just here. You guys have encouraged me in the group. You, Brian, y'all always like, share your story. Gave me your platform, and just being able to come on and share the story. I understand that I've learned lessons and that were hard, were hard to come by, right? Now it's easy to say, hey, I did 20 years, but during those 20 years, they were very difficult. So I'm grateful to have you on here, and I appreciate it, man. Thank you for having me on.
Tell Before we jump off, just tell people where they can find you on social media, or if maybe somebody is a young man who's wants some business solutions, how can
Yeah.
they find
So
out more about you?
like I said, we have two programs. CMJ Business Solutions, that is our client acquisition and scaling business, where we just help businesses grow, right? Local service businesses. That's what we focus on. to help them grow. And then Black Business Warrior, right, is the channel where we work on Black men to become warriors, and we say, hey, we want to help Black men who want to make money and make an impact. You can find us on, we have a YouTube channel, there's Instagram, and all of them are Black Business Warrior. And you can and then we have the website, which is theblackbusinessman.com, theblackbusinessman.com, and you can find us on there. So, and I tell all the young men, you want to reach out. This program, like I said, we're focused on young men in the community. Anybody can reach, any man can reach out, you know what I mean? But we are focused on Black men, but any man can reach out, you know what I mean? We're not saying, hey, nobody can reach out, but that is our target market. That is our focus, because there is a specific thing that's going on in Black communities, right? That there is a certain thing that happened to Black communities. And I said, I've learned some things, and I feel like I have some contribution, and this is my way of contributing. So that's where you can find us at.
Well, Clive Morrison, the founder of CMJ Business Solutions, the Black Business Warrior, and the blackbusinessman.com. Check him out on socials. Follow him to learn more about how you can change the trajectory of your life experience, learn more about building your business, and learn more about what it means to be a human being in a tough world, and creating a community of guidance and support to make better decisions and to help our communities stay safer and flourish and grow, and help us to breathe that fresh air of what it means to feel like we can thrive in the world by supporting each other and learning from each other. So thank you again, my brother. I appreciate your time today. And
thank you.
I look forward to maybe sitting down with you again and having another conversation, a follow-up sometime soon. All right?
Whenever, let me know, man. Let me know, and I'm here.
All right. Thanks, man. Have a good one.
Peace.